Hello, I'm Qubit, and welcome to my Visual Studio Code introduction and overview video. Today we'll be going over Visual Studio Code. It's a cross-platform editor, supports tons of different languages, is a really fantastic editor. It can be used, honestly, as like a full-blown IDE for some languages. So how do you get Visual Studio Code? You can go to code.visualstudio.com, and you can download it from here. I'm on Linux, so right now it's offering me a .deb or .rpm file to download. If you want to download for Windows, Mac, or Linux, you can download all three of those from this download button up top. It gives you the option for 64-bit, 32-bit Windows 7, 8, and 10, Debian 64-bit, RPM 64-bit, and Mac. If you're on Arch Linux, you can also install from the AUR. I'll have those instructions down in the description. You can also download it from pretty much any other distribution repository through your repositories commands. You should know how to do that if you're using Linux. If you don't, you can easily look that up. But they do offer the .deb and .rpm easy files from right here. So once you've downloaded these files and installed them, we can get into how to use and work our way around Visual Studio Code. So I'll meet you back when I have Visual Studio Code up and running. All right, welcome to Visual Studio Code. I know this says Visual Studio Code Insiders. Insiders is just the nightly build for Visual Studio Code. It has more updates from the upstream GitHub repository that people have contributed to. So it's got a few minor changes that aren't in regular Visual Studio Code, but that should be negligible, and all subsequent videos will be using the regular Visual Studio Code. My Visual Studio Code is just very heavily edited and changed to my liking, so I figured having a clean install of Insiders was a good place to use to introduce you to Visual Studio Code and how to use it. To start, we have this little start thing right here. It's got three options: new file, open folder, and add workspace. New file creates a new file, as you can see here. Open folder opens a new folder, or opens your file explorer to open a folder as a workspace. Add workspace folder, we'll go ahead and add a workspace folder to your workspace. We have a recents list right here. This recents list will be populated with a few of your projects that you have open once you've opened some projects and started coding in them. There is a help section down here on the left. We have printable keyboard cheat sheet, introductory videos from Microsoft themselves, tips and tricks on how to use VS Code, product documentation, their GitHub repository, Stack Overflow, and you can join their newsletter if you're so inclined. I will be doing as much as I can in this video to show Visual Studio Code from kind of a scratch the surface level while still going in some detail of how to use Visual Studio Code. The introductory videos from this help section right here should be good as well. So if you want to go ahead and subscribe to my channel, I will be doing more videos on Visual Studio Code as well as regular programming videos. I plan on doing language series on a few different languages, C, C++, Java, and C# to begin with as just a few. So I will be doing those in Visual Studio Code, showing you how to set those up, the basics from knowing nothing to being able to do simple algorithms and design object-oriented programming patterns, etc. So if you're interested in that, a subscribe would be much appreciated to keep up to date on when those videos come out. And a like on this video would also be super appreciated. So if you learned something, or if you like the video so far, give it a like, and I really appreciate it. So this welcome screen is shown every time you open Visual Studio Code. If you don't want to see it every time you open Visual Studio Code, you can check this checkbox right here, and it will no longer be shown. I actually tend to like the welcome screen just because of this recents list right here. Makes things really useful when you've got a couple of projects and you keep going back to those projects over and over again. All right, so now that we've learned a little bit about the welcome screen, let's look at the right side of the welcome screen. So we have a customize section right here. Now Visual Studio Code is very adaptive to what you want it to be. So Visual Studio Code offers built-in support for a few languages, JavaScript and Python included. It also has extensions to help with other languages. And if you want to see those extensions or see the support extensions, you can click that box right there. and it'll open the extensions view, and you can see all the different extensions for languages and helper extensions for built-in languages. There's also settings and key bindings, so if you're coming from a different editor like Vim or Sublime or Atom, or even another editor, you can click this box and it will take you to the extensions that offer those key bindings, so you can install those extensions and have those key bindings already for you. You don't have to worry about changing or learning the new key bindings for Visual Studio Code. You can just install that extension and you're good to go. Visual Studio Code also is very customizable with its color theme and scheming. So if you want to change the color theme, you can click this box right here and it'll open up the color theme option list thing up in the top. Now, when you're changing over each of these color themes, it actually shows you a preview of what the color theme looks like. Now, these are some of the built-in color themes from Visual Studio Code that come with it. Personally, I'm not really a fan of any of the themes other than Light Plus and Dark Plus. So we'll just leave it at Dark Plus. We can, and I'll show you that it's a preview instead of it actually setting it. So we'll go to Can Be Dark, not hit Enter, we'll hit Escape, and you can see it goes back to what the previously set theme was. There are extensions you can download from the extensions marketplace for different themes. If you search color theme, you can see a bunch of different themes, including material theme. You can click that and see what the material theme has, how to install it, etc. You can see material icon themes. They also have icon themes, so you can see all the icon themes down here. So really, Visual Studio Code allows you to change the look and feel to exactly how you want it to be for you. So if we go back to the welcome page, and if you ever lose the welcome page, if you want the welcome page back, you can hit Help up here and click Welcome, and it takes you back to the welcome page. Now, the Learn section here is another way of getting used to Visual Studio Code and how to use it. So Visual Studio Code kind of runs off of a command system in a sense. You can run commands at any moment from Visual Studio Code to manipulate VS Code itself or a specific extension. This box right here will open up that command palette for you. It's also Control-Shift-P on Windows and Linux devices and Command-Shift-P on Macs. For the future of this video, I'm going to use Control since I am on a Linux machine. If you're on a Mac, just know that when I say Control, I actually mean Command. So this is the command palette. This allows you to have full control over Visual Studio Code as well as its extensions you have installed. There are a ton of these commands that you can run and use that are available to you. You can, go to them and click them and see which ones, change things and mess around with them. Really, it's kind of your own playground. You can do whatever you want. These are my two recently used options that I've used. This one was for before recording. I had to set a setting in the JSON file, as well as this was when I changed the color theme to show you color themes. To continue on with this learning section, there's an interface overview to show you how the interface works, what these icons do if you ever forget. It also shows you the keybinds to get to each of these different stations, I guess, in Visual Studio Code next to the name. So you can see we have File Explorer over here on the top left, as well as Search Across Files. This is a global search, search code management, or not search code, source code management. This is for your Git or Azure or something. Launch a debug. This is how you run and debug your programs. And the extensions marketplace. You can manage your extensions there, install and uninstall extensions that you would like. Down here on the left of this sidebar, we have the settings cog. This gives you certain settings like check for updates and see keybinds and settings and stuff like that. On the very, very bottom, we have a status bar, and on the bottom left, we have errors and warnings for the current workspace and project we have open. There is an integrated terminal with VS Code. If you're on Windows, it will use PowerShell. If you're on Mac or Linux, it will use whatever your shell is or whatever your terminal is. if you set that in the settings, you can actually change that if you want. Pretty sure it just defaults to bash as long as you have bash installed. If you have sh, it'll do sh, etc. And then on the bottom right here, we have a notification bell. This will show us notifications. We can click that and see any notifications that are currently in our project. Usually those are for, like, when Visual Studio Code has updates, or if something goes wrong with an extension, or an extension needs updates or something like that. There's also this command thing up here, this command bar, open by Control-Shift-P. We saw that earlier with the find and run all commands box right here. The final thing in the learn section is this interactive playground. This is honestly the greatest thing to ever be in an editor ever. This shows a lot of really key features that Visual Studio Code has that you can mess around with. All of these sections with code lines you can change. So we can go in here and change this to FF1100, and we can change, the color of things. We can actually set it to something like that and actually see a much larger color change. Visual Studio Code also has a color picker up here. If you hover over a hex color, or one of these two different JavaScript, HTML type, or CSS type colors. So there's a ton of stuff Visual Studio Code has built into it, like multi-cursor editing, IntelliSense, line actions, rename refactoring, formatting, code folding, etc. You can come in here and play for several hours learning new features. This is what I did when I downloaded Visual Studio Code for the first time. I came in here and I played around with all the different things that Visual Studio Code has to offer, and it honestly helps a ton when you're getting started and learning with VS Code. So that's the welcome screen. After the welcome screen, you kind of want to start to get to know these sidebar panels right here. So if we click the top one, the File Explorer, this will show you what your project looks like in a File Explorer. It shows your folders and your files as they're open in this Open Editors thing, and just as a file tree in this section right here. We will come back to this when we open a workspace and I tell you how workspaces work in Visual Studio Code, but for now this will just show you all the files and folders in your project. Search is a global search. It allows you to search all the files that you have in your project. In your workspace, you can search for keywords and sentences, etc. You can even replace what is found from your search. And there's also search filters with this toggleable search filters button right here. You can filter files to be included and filter files to be excluded. So if you really want to find something in like one specific file, you can have this one specific file, like main.cpp, and it'll only look in the main.cpp file. Otherwise, it'll look in all files. Your results will show up right here. And that's pretty much it for the global search. It does do matching case as well as whole words, and uses reg expressions. There's an option to replace all as just, as well as the replace singular. So moving on from search, now source control. If you have Git installed, it'll default to Git. Most people use Git for their source control, so that's really not an issue. If you don't want to use Git, you can look up on Visual Studio Code's website on how to change your source control to a different program. But what this does is this basically shows a little text box right here when you have a project open, and I'll show you once we get a project running. I'll have a default project or a example project a little later on to show all these things a little bit more in depth. This allows you to set your commits and add certain files to commits, as well as look at the differences of those files. Moving on from source control, we have debug and run start. This is where you will launch your debug for, or release versions of your project. So this is where you can run them and test them. You have debug and run for basic startup options. It also can do individual files or full folders based on what language you're using and what your project type is. Like Python, it'll do like a single file or whatever, and then C# or C++ or whatever it'll do, you know, a larger project, mainly C#. C++ I think can do just single file as well. And then finally we have our extensions. This is our extension marketplace. You can download all types of different extensions for, you know, ease of use or novelty. One of the novelty extensions that I kind of like is a Spotify extension, because I use Spotify a lot. It's called vscode Spotify, and allows you to control your Spotify through the status bar in Visual Studio Code without needing to go back and forth between Spotify on your system. So with extensions out of the way, we'll come down here to the command icon, the little cog thing down there in the bottom left. And this allows us to look at some of the settings. So we can open up the command palette. If you forget the keybind for the command palette, you can open it through there. It also allows you to open the settings to change some of the settings. You can see online service settings, takes you to the extensions workplace, which we already have open. You can see the keyboard shortcuts list here. We can see key maps for the extensions if you want to install the key map extensions. There's user snippets, which you can see here, snippets for all the different languages. Color theme will open up your color theme options. File icon theme will open your file icon theme options. Default is SETI, and then if you have updates, you can download updates from here. Since I'm running through the Arch user repository, this download update won't really do anything. I have to wait until the repository is updated, but that usually doesn't take too long. So moving on to settings. There are two different types of settings in Visual Studio Code, or more so two ways that they present settings to you. There's the settings UI, which we currently have open right now, and then there is settings JSON. If we want to see the JSON settings, we can do Control-Shift-P to open our command prompt and search settings. And somewhere in this settings, there will be a preferences : open settings JSON. It's already in my recently used because I used it not too long ago. And we can hit enter on that, and it will open our JSON settings. So you can see I already have a couple of settings set in here. This allows for full control over your settings. There are some settings that don't exist in the UI that do exist here. So as long as you know the name of the setting, you can set it in here. This file does include IntelliSense, so you can change some of the settings in here, like so. We'll go ahead and do files.autosave, and you can see it does have IntelliSense for suggestions and stuff like that, so we can set that to off again. We would do Control-S is save single file, and we can go back to the UI. The UI has some commonly used settings you can change right here, like the editor font size, autosave delay, autosave files on or off, and your font family. So if you want to change your font, like I will change this Droid Sans Mono to Consolas, you can see that those settings are automatically saved in the UI. They're not automatically saved in the JSON file. You have to save that JSON file since that is a separate file. There's also two different types of settings. There's global settings and workspace settings. So when you have a workspace open, you have the option to change settings for that specific workspace. So if you want a specific color theme for that workspace, or like you want autosave to be enabled for a specific workspace, you can enable it only for that workspace once you have a workspace open. So that pretty much does it for settings. You can kind of go in here and search for all the settings if you want to see what all the settings it has. It got a ton. So yeah, we'll move on from settings to the editor next. So now that you know the settings and now you know your way around the sidebar, we'll open up this Explorer here, and I'll go ahead and open a folder. You won't be able to see my File Explorer based on the way that I'm recording this, but it'll open up your File Explorer, ask you to open up a folder. I'm going to open up a blank folder called VS Code Workspace, I think is what I called it. And it's in temporary VS Code Workspace. So once you open a workspace, it brings you back to the welcome page. But now you can see the bottom bar has changed to blue from purple. Purple indicated that we did not have a workspace or folder open. Blue indicates that we do have a workspace open. So now that we have a workspace open, what is a workspace? Well, a workspace is just a folder that encapsulates smaller projects or, more projects. So if you're coming from the editor Eclipse. You're probably more familiar with workspaces than, say other editors. But mainly, you just have your workspace folder, and here you can see my workspace folder is vscode workspace. And in this folder, we can have several different projects. So to show that we can have multiple different projects, I'm going to open up the integrated terminal in Visual Studio Code, and that is done with Control tilde, and that'll open up the integrated terminal. And you can see it automatically puts me in the directory of my workspace. And I can actually show the directory to my workspace here. It's in my home temporary folder, VS Code workspace. So this is my workspace. I'm going to create a new C# project, .NET new console -n. We'll name it introduction project. So this will create us a new C# project in our workspace. Now, if you come up here, you can see this is our project right here in a folder called Introduction Project inside VS Code Workspace. So we have our workspace that encapsulates our project. We can click this file and we can see some notifications down here. This is kind of specific for C#. The C# extension is recommended for this file type. So if Visual Studio Code recognizes a specific language that you have open in a file and you don't have that extension installed, it will prompt you to ask and see if you want to install that extension. I will hit install because I do want to install the C# extension for Visual Studio Code because it is a very, very useful extension. So as you can see, that did not take very long. That went ahead and finished in the output tab of the integrated terminal. The output tab has many different views you can see right here. I'll get into that a little bit later. But we have the extension installed. We can go back up to the Explorer. And now we have this project open with full IntelliSense and the extension ready to go. Now say we want a C++ project also in this workspace. We can create a new folder and we'll call it C++ project. Create a new folder. And inside this folder, we'll create a new file by right-clicking and hitting new file. Alternately, we can click the new file icon right here. Create a new file, call it main.cpp. And now we have a C++ project and a C# project in our workspace. Now, as well, you can see it saw the file extension and is asking if we want to install the extension for C++. I'll go ahead and install that one as well. That one won't take too long either. There we go. We're done with that. So now we have two extensions installed and we have two separate projects in one workspace. Now, you have a project and you want to run it. How do you run a project in Visual Studio Code? So, if you want to run a project in Visual Studio Code, we can go to this Debug Run tab right here, and we can click Create a Launch.json file. This will bring up the environment selection options for how you want to run your project. We want to run a C# project, so we're going to click the .NET Core launch.json template. Now this opens what's called a launch.json. So Visual Studio Code runs on pretty much JSON files for telling it how to do things. So this isn't like a full-blown IDE where you have a run button and you just click the run button and you're good to go. It kind of sets everything up for you in the background. Visual Studio Code has some different options you can set, and everything is pretty user-heavy in terms of configuration. If we go back to the File Explorer, we can see here now that there is a .vscode folder. This .vscode folder contains two files, a launch.json and a tasks.json. This launch.json contains everything necessary for how Visual Studio Code should launch our program. Tasks.json is any task that we want to do during our launch or before our launch. So tasks and launching are two separate things. In our launch.json, we'll go through this launch.json. This one has some specific options to C#, and this is built from the C# extension. That's what gave us the .NET Core option when we were creating our launch.json. So we have the name for our launch. This one is .NET Core Launch Console, and we can see that in our debug and run options here. If we expand this over a little bit, this is the name of our launch. We can have several different launches. As you can see here, this is one launch and this is another launch. This one is named .NET Core Attach. This one really isn't used that often in terms of desktop launching, but yeah, so we can actually rename this to like debug, and we can save that, and you can see here it changed to debug, and we have so now debug and .NET Core tag. The type is core CLR, that's C# specific, request is launch. We have a pre-launch task called build. Now, pre-launch task is a task that's run when we launch our project, and we want to launch our build task. So if we go back into our tasks.json, we can find the task with the label build, and this is what will run before our project launches. So what's going to run is it's going to run the .NET command as a process. It's going to run build. It's going to build our CS project file, and it's going to run with generate full paths and console logger parameters set to no summary. And that will basically build our project for us. And then it will launch the program introduction project.dll with command line arguments. This is the current working directory for the project. These are console options. So you can have the program print in the debug console. That's considered the internal console. There are other console options. If you hit Control Space, you can get the IntelliSense. We have the external terminal, which will open a separate terminal outside of Visual Studio Code, integrated terminal, and an internal console. I tend to do the integrated terminal because it's easier than the debug console. The debug console doesn't allow for input, so if you're doing like enter your age or whatever, the debug console doesn't support that as far as I'm aware. So the integrated terminal is the best bet. Now, default, the debug console opens every time you run the project. So if you want to have the debug console not open, you can do internal console options, set that to never open. And now that will only open to this terminal every time you run your project. So if we go back to our project, we open our program.cs. Say we want to run our project. If you've ever used Visual Studio, it's the same key. You just hit F5, you hit F5, and it will run your project for you. Now, this is the command that it's running. It actually shows you when you have it running through the terminal, the command. And you can see that our output was printed here, hello world. Now, if we want that to stop, we can do console.read line, add that there, and run it again, and that way I can show you what these are. So here you have your different options for when you're running a project. You have a pause to pause when you're in debug mode. You can pause the program on the current line. You can continue once you've paused it. You can step over a line when it's paused or stuck on a breakpoint. You can step into a function or line if you're stuck on a breakpoint or you've paused, and you can also step out. There's also the option to restart your project while it's running. So if you're running your project and you want it to restart from the top, you can click this or do Control-Shift-F5. And there is the stop option to stop your program if it's frozen or paused or stuck or something weird or wonky is happening. You can always stop it like that from the little option panel that shows up. Now you have a project running, you have a workspace open, you have multiple projects in your workspace. Your .vscode folder can have multiple different launch options, so you can actually in here create a different launch option for C++ and do it that way. I will be doing videos on how to set up the environment for each the languages that I said at the beginning of this video. So if you want to see those, feel free to subscribe and you will see those videos when they are live. So how to do source control. So we have no source control at the moment, but if we want to add our workspace to some repository, I'm going to use Git, and I'll probably make a video on how to use Git in the near future. But for right now, I'll just do the commands to show you how the source control in VS Code works. So right now we'll do, okay, so this is an issue. Sometimes it happens in Visual Studio Code where the terminal will not show output, at least on Arch Linux for me. I'm not really sure why it does that, but yeah, so I'll just go back to the terminal real quick right here. And we will do git init dot to initialize this as a repository. And whoa, a lot of files are here now in the source control section of Visual Studio Code. So all of these are files that have not been synced with our repository that we have, say it be at GitHub or GitLab or, on a different computer or whatever. So the options that you have here are individual files. You can add individual files to, a commit, and these would be considered stage changes. So you don't have to run the commands in the terminal. You can do all that from here. So we can stage, individual files or stage all changes from the changes title bar thing here. And then this is a toggle view mode. You can see it in like a list with folders or just each individual thing, not in inside folders. We can set a commit message like initial commit and then hit this check mark here. This will go ahead and commit all of our changes to our repository. This will refresh our repository, and these are different options you can choose from. So if you don't want to push or pull from the command line, you can set up Visual Studio Code to push and pull from here using these options. You just have to set in Git what repository it is supposed to push and pull from. Now, if you look at the bottom status bar here, you can now see a bunch of different things now that we have some projects open and running. We can see now this right here. This is our source control option. This shows us which branch we are. We are on the master branch. If you click it, it gives you some options for Git. You can create a new branch or create a new branch from a specific branch. And it also allows us the option to choose the branch that we want to be on, which is just master at the moment. We have our options and warnings, our problems and warnings. This will take us to the problems panel on our integrated terminal area. And it shows us in our launch.json, we have multiple schemas where only one must validate. We can click that. It'll open our project for us, and it'll show us where the project or where the problem/warning is. Now we also have our debug configuration right down here. So this is a configuration selector, so we can select debug, and it will go ahead and run our project based on the selection we chose. You'll also notice when you're running a project, the status bar changes color again to orange to indicate that you are currently running a project. Now, this little fire icon is specific to C# and the OmniSharp plugin or extension. This is all the information on the OmniSharp plugin and whether or not it's working correctly. This will be talked about more in depth in our C# videos when we create those later. This here shows us our workspace. On the right here, we have line 14, column 1. This is where our current cursor is. We can actually, set the line number right here. We can do like, 5, go to line 5 if we want to do that. And there's the amount of spaces for indentation down here again. This is our encoding type. So we are encoding with UTF-8 with BOM. This is our select end of line sequence. CRLF is our select end of line sequence. This tells us the language that we are currently using in this file. So this is C#, and if we go to C++, we can see that it switches to C++. There's also this little happy dude over here, this little smiling guy. You can tweet them your feedback if you enjoy Visual Studio Code. I would recommend doing so because they deserve it. This is very, very, very good editor. So you can tweet them with that, and you can see our notifications down here. We have one new notification. The required assets to build and debug are missing from vscode workspace. Add them. This is specific to C#. We already went ahead and did that manually by creating the launch.json file. You can create it individually with this right here, but we'll go more into depth on that in our C# video as well, because that is specific to C# and the OmniSharp plugin. So we can close that notification, get that gone, and therefore we have no more notification. There's one more thing I want to show with debugging. When we're debugging, we'll go ahead and set a breakpoint here on hello world. We'll go ahead and add a variable int a equals 5, so that way we have a variable set. We can save that file, hit F5, we'll go ahead and run it. And you'll notice that it stops on the breakpoint. VS Code does do breakpoints. It also shows you a ton of other information here in this debug field. We have our variables. We have local variables. We have our args for our command line arguments. Currently, we have 0 command line arguments, so there's nothing to see in there. We have our variable a, which we created here, set equal to 5. If you want to set variables to watch, you can add a variable here. We'll set a. it will watch A as the program continues as long as A stays within the scope of your project. There's a call stack for C#. You can see the C# call stack where it paused on the breakpoint, as well as, there's some external code and stuff. And notice when we go out of scope, our A watch goes to, disappeared. It doesn't know where to find it because it's outside of the scope because we're on external code right now. Go back to the regular C# call stack, we can see that 5 exists again. Breakpoints, we have all exceptions here. We can break on all exceptions if we want to for C#, user unhandled exceptions, and then we have our custom exception or custom breakpoint right here in program.cs on line 10. Visual Studio Code does do expressional or like if statement expression or if statement breakpoints, so we can do if A is less than 10, like such, and this will be a conditional breakpoint. That's what it's called, a conditional breakpoint. And it will breakpoint based on the condition you have set. So, yeah, that's debugging in a nutshell, as well as the Explorer and the editors. These you can see here, open editors we have. These are just the tabs we have open at the moment. So, went through the settings, went through the extensions, debugged a template project, opened a workspace, explained what workspaces were, showed settings and how to edit those settings. We went through the side panel options here, went through the status bar, and showed the welcome screen. I think that about does it for the main information about Visual Studio Code. There are some smaller things. For example, these buttons up here, like the split editor right, will split the editor for you. That way you can have more than one editor open at a time. You can also drag and drop editors to one side or the other. But these can all be found through exploration on your own by looking at the buttons and things and having fun with what you want to do with Visual Studio Code. So I think that might be it for this video. I might do another video going way in depth in Visual Studio Code if that is requested. But for now, this does the job for getting you up and running with a project and a workspace in Visual Studio Code. So if you enjoyed the video and you learned something, please subscribe and like, so that way you can see when new videos come out. And it really helps to see what you guys want for future videos. If you liked it or didn't like it, I can switch up my programming style or recording style and such, and we can work that out from likes versus dislikes, etc. Leave a comment if you think I missed something, or you have something to explain, or I got something wrong or whatever. You can leave a comment and let me know, or leave a comment and let me know what your favorite language is and why VS Code is your favorite editor. But other than that, that's going to be it for me for now. Thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Keep a lookout for my future videos on the different languages and how to set those up. And yeah, I hope you all have a good one. Peace.